My goal is not to be a big businessman and having a big company. I studied viticulture and enology to do viticulture and enology, and working in these vineyards also makes me think a lot, honestly, because you really want to treat them right. You don't want to be the last generation farming the vine that were surviving 4 generations, 5 generations. Yeah, it's for me unbelievable that we can farm a plant that was planted in times where even Germany was not founded.
Hey, this is Harman Skurnik, and today I'm here with Mike Lykens, who is our portfolio manager for all German and Austrian wines. It's a pretty important role, and you had the pleasure of interviewing recently one of our really great producers, Christopher Loewen.
Yes,
How did it go?
really well. Christopher Loewen has taken over from his father, Karl-Josef, and they are, wonderful stewards of old vines in the Mosel.
I remember when we first started working with the Loewen estate, and I met Carl, but Christopher at the time must have been a child. But as time went on and he grew up, he's quite an impressive young guy.
He really is. He has, he's wise beyond his years for sure. And I think, viticulture, particularly in Germany, kind of produces these individuals because they grow up with this understanding that every vine that they plant, the very best fruit that that vine will produce will be well after they're long gone. And so they look at this, at their vineyards, as their living cultural history. And to find a young man who um, understands that to his core and is so proud of that history is really refreshing to see. He cares just so deeply about the vineyards that he works in.
Some of the old vines that they have are some of the oldest in the Mosel or even in all of Germany. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so there is, I think I would press pause on saying they're the oldest Riesling vines in the world because there is an old vine registry and there are some things on there that look quite old, but their oldest vines were planted in 1896.
Old enough, I think.
Old enough, yes, exactly right.
Didn't they acquire some vineyards from the Schmitt-Wagner estate?
Yeah, it's one of my absolute favorite, stories to tell. So, and actually, it's so funny because it happened on a Skurnik June tour, our annual tour every year in June, where
You
we,
were responsible for this transaction?
I believe you were responsible, Harmon. Um, no, this was a tour in which we take all of our growers across the country and promote the wines. But Carl and Bruno, were friendly, and Bruno mentioned that didn't have anybody that was interested in taking over his vineyards and taking over these vines. And these are really important vines because his family had bought them directly from the Napoleonic auctions in the 1800s, and before that, the vines exclusively belonged to the church. And so there were, only 3 kind of documented owners of this really special vineyards. And over time, they spoke more and more, but they never spoke business. They always talked about kind of philosophy and life and family and about their culture. And Karl-Josef came back to the estate with Christopher, and he said, I feel really good. I think that he's going to sell us these vines. And Christopher goes, oh, really? How much? And he goes, well, we didn't talk business. But he just had that feeling of that, again, this heritage that they wanted to make sure that the vines ended up in
the right hands. Yeah.
And so like these are like the things, these romantic stories that make us fall in love with wine culture.
Fantastic story. Well, Christopher, I would say, is not only a wonderful winemaker, he's a wonderful guy, but I would say that the wines have never been better. Do you agree with that?
100%. I would say that he is navigating the new kind of these these new challenges with like the climate, really extreme weather conditions. He's navigating them really well, and it's quite simple. You know, I believe that Riesling is the king of all grapes, and it expresses itself through a variety of spectrums. And Christopher understands that he doesn't make wine for a market, so to speak. So he believes in spontaneous fermentations and for the most part, letting the wine decide when the fermentation is done. And so if that's your only focus, and once the fermentation stops, the wine knows that it's done and it's balanced. And so it's like the old school low intervention of winemaking.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation you had with him, and why don't we just listen in and see what you guys have to say?
Great.
Thank you, Mike.
Today, I'm sitting down with Christopher Loewen in the Mosel, based in the town of Loewen, and we are incredibly big fans of the estates and the collection of wines that you produce. Would you give us a brief, introduction into your section of the Mosel and what it is that makes your area so special?
Yeah, so thanks a lot, everyone. So my name is Christopher Loewen from winery Karl-Josef. We are located in, as you said, in the city of Loewen, which is a little bit in the upper part of the middle Mosel. So we are located in between the two main cities of Mosel, Trier and Bernkastel. Our part of the Mosel is maybe a little bit cooler than the traditional, or colder than the traditional middle Mosel, which brings a little bit more salinity and freshness to the wines.
And you also have maybe some of the largest collection of old vines of any estate that we work with. That's quite an interesting story. I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
Basically, it's a story of our estate going a long time back. In the Mid Ages, the best vineyards in the Mosel Valley were farmed by monks. And then around 1800, Napoleon the Conqueror came to our area. And in 1803, he set up a big auction to gain more money for the war, to go further east. And so in 1803, they sold the best vineyards of the abbeys. And so an ancestor of me, Nikolaus Loewen, was the last vineyard manager of that abbey. And so he bought out the best parcels. And that was basically the start of our estate. And that is the Maximin Klosterlei vineyard that we still farm in the city of Detzem. And then, the family went on farming this vineyard, but more as a normal farm. So we had farmland, we had cows, we had corn and vineyards, which was quite common in the Mosel. And so then my father took over the estate in mid of the 80s as a very, very tiny estate, around 1 hectare he took over. And from the start, he had directly the goal to make great wines and not just average wines. And in the 80s, the Mosel was facing a big crisis. And he used that crisis selling the more easier flat vineyards with young vines and buying top sites with very old ungrafted vines. We had a big advantage somehow in that crisis because the great vineyards that were unaffordable for a normal family like us for over 100 years, we could afford. We focused a lot on buying more old vineyards, and the estate was growing because the success was also growing more and more with higher wine qualities that we could produce. And so the estate was growing from 1 to nowadays about 18 hectares. And in that time, we always focusing on buying old vine parcels. And that is the big advantage that I have nowadays, that such a huge portion of our estate is planted with older vineyards.
So you basically got in early on these really great old vines that they most likely wouldn't have been available for someone like a family like yours to purchase in the middle Mosel, especially within that in that quantity, which is quite rare and quite special. And now it seems though your section of the Mosel is starting to get a bit more of the recognition that it deserves.
Yeah, definitely. You can say historically the area around Bernkastel was the most famous part of the Mosel. The reason for this is, in my opinion, also mostly the climate, because the area around Bernkastel is a bit warmer. And yeah, if you go a few decades back, it was always a big fight in the Mosel to get the grapes ripe. Yeah, especially in the colder vintage, it was normal that sometimes you couldn't get the grapes ripe. And so that was a little bit a disadvantage of our part of the Mosel. But now, with the climate getting warmer a bit every year, we can have nowadays just the perfect ripeness. And I think feels a little bit awkward to say, but like honestly, our estate had really advantages also in the warmer climate of the last years, and that brought unbelievable qualities of dry wines too in our area.
Yeah, it really has been amazing to watch kind of the evolution of wines in the Mosel. It almost seems as though, historically there was always wines made with residual sugar out of necessity,
Mhm.
and because you're always fighting for more ripeness and
Mhm.
fighting for the perfect structure, and now you're fighting against ripeness. It's
Yeah, yeah. So it's really, yeah, a lot has changed. Also, like for me as a young person, I'm 33 years old, and I already see that the climate is changing, the viticulture is changing. But I really, as I said, I feel like my generation being a bit on the perfect spot of climate in the Mosel Valley, and being maybe the perfect generation that we can still make those traditional fruity styles in high altitude parcels, in parcels that have more freshness, more elegance. But on the other hand, we can make really great dry wines in the warmer parcels that have the ripeness, that bring the structure and complexity to the wines.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's one of the very few lucky places in the world right now where wines like this are even possible with this level of, for me, precision. There's depth, there's
Mhm.
complexity, but there's also an immense amount of pleasure in these wines.
Yeah.
It's quite special. I should go back to the beginning. Your estate, though, still is quite small. It's a quite small family operation. How many hectares are you, and how many full-time employees do
Yeah.
you have?
So yeah, we are in the structure a bit unusual. So we do about 18 hectares right now, which is for Mosel not tiny, but also not big. So we have nowadays super big estates with over 100 hectares in the area, but the average winery is still about 3 or 4 hectare,
Okay.
because farming in the Mosel means a lot of handwork, a lot of tough, intense manual work. Basically, yeah, our winery is set up really, really small. It's just basically my father, one employee, and me. So if now sitting here in New York, if you would call now in the winery, the phone would just ring and nobody would answer. So it's I studied viticulture and enology, and I always say I studied viticulture and enology to do viticulture and enology. And my goal is not to be a big businessman and having a big company. I also see my strength in being a good viticulturist and winemaker, and that allows us also doing a very individual farming of our vines. So there is no master plan of farming in our winery. It's really just in the summer being every day in the vines, seeing how the weather has influenced the vineyards, and while working there, seeing also how to react on maybe a rain or a hot day or high humidity, low humidity, lots of growth or weak growth. So we can really, yeah, while I'm every day outside, there is everyday decisions and making a very individual farming. And that's the same in the cellar. There is no plan how to ferment the wine. They all do natural fermentation, but normally in the winter, I'm every day in the cellar. Now for 5 days, not. So my father is now taking over for a few days, but texting him every day. There's just more decision made through how the wines individually taste.
Yeah. It's almost like parenting a little bit in the sense that, except for you're not telling the vines what to do, you're listening, and the
Yeah,
vines are telling
yeah,
you what's going on and what they need,
yeah,
and you have to just be there when
yeah.
they need it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, totally right. And I think a very good example with parenting. And you can You can try to parent each child the same way, or you can try to listen to the child and react if it's, not every child wants to do sport, or others want to play music, and I think it's not a good idea to put every child into, so it must be a musician or it must be a sportler. So it depends on what the child can offer,
I mean, and the reality is, because you have such a large collection of old vines, I mean, I can't think of anybody that has as many vines as you planted between 1896 and 1903. They've lived a lot more life than you and I have. So they have a lot to tell us, even though they've been in that same space.
Yes, and that's even for me really sometimes crazy to understand. Working in these vineyards also makes me think a lot, honestly, because you really want to treat them right. You don't want to be the last generation farming the vine that were surviving 4 generations, 5 generations. Yeah, it's for me unbelievable that we can farm a plant that was planted in times where even Germany was not founded.
Yeah. It's humbling to think about that,
Yeah.
it almost, as an outsider, I can't imagine what that sort of responsibility must feel like in terms of you really wanting to do right by these magical little vines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
I'd like to pause and maybe now talk about kind of what we're here for is some of the wines themselves. The first wine I wanted to talk a little bit about today is your estate, Altareben.
Mhm.
First of all, it's of course one of my favorite labels of all time. It's romantic. Yeah, this is exactly what the vines look like.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, a wine that is also to me and our whole estate very important because for me, somehow, this wine is the outcome of working 2 generations towards one way. My father started focusing on old vine vineyards, and so could buy a lot of very old parcels in the last 50 years. And that brings us to the big advantage that we have a high selection of older vineyards. And so the old vine Riesling is not only as a Grand Cru or a GG, so that allows us also to make a wine from 50 to 70-year-old vines, which is in the basically the village quality category. The older vines have a lot deeper roots. They have tinier berries, and also we try to do a little bit low interventional viticulture. So basically, maybe we can talk later about it. We do in the cellar low interventional winemaking, but also in the viticulture, we try to not to interfere in the vineyards too much. And that only works when you have a very weak growing vine that is not making a lot of leaves and not making a lot of grapes. My father is also quite proud on saying he has never cut down a green grape from a vine. So we never did green harvest, which is quite common to give the wines more complexity. But our view is more long term, and so bringing the whole balance in the vineyard. Balance is for me the most important word in viticulture and in winemaking, and really bringing the growth down so that you have naturally that low yield, and then you have wines with very good structure and complexity.
Yeah, they're quite special, and if you haven't had the wines, for anybody listening out there, the just the amount of kind of concentration and depth. But this is also, before we move on to the next wine,
Mhm.
this is also a wine that you don't force the fermentation one way or the other. You let the fermentation stop when it does.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So basically, that's also something that we realized in the last few years, you could say. We do all the wines, we do natural fermentation. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. So basically, we try to do low interventional winemaking in the sense of very traditional winemaking. That means we just pick the grapes, press them, letting them fall by gravity into the cellar. The cellar is classically down in the earth, so we can work with gravity. And the big advantage for us in the earth is also that we don't need any cooling or heating system. It just ferments how it ferments, but the temperature is very stable in the earth. It ferments without any additions. And then, sometimes the natural yeast is not strong enough to ferment the wine all the way through until very dry levels. Yeah, there were times where we're thinking about adding yeast or so to really make the fermentation going again, or waiting a lot longer. Maybe then the fermentation starts again or so. But what we saw very often is that when we interfered, we saw very often that these wines were taste-wise showing an imbalance. That also led us at the end to the point where we said, maybe it's smarter to let the wine decide
Yeah.
how it will be at the end.
Right.
And when the wine stops fermentation, we accept it. And then we bottle it the way it is. Since we are doing that, I feel also that the wines have a very good balance. I'm not a big fan of numbers in winemaking anymore, because I also say no customers has numbers. So we all taste the wine. And I think it's more important to have a wine that just tastes balanced than something that we pushed to certain numbers.
Right. Instead of, and sometimes these numbers are somewhat arbitrary, and we utilize them for commerce, for sales and marketing, but it's not what makes the very best wine.
Yeah. And I also think that tasting wine is such a complex thing, and flavors is such a complex thing, that with a few numbers, we can't get what the wine actually tastes. And so it's a little bit misleading also. All winemakers want to have a certain safety in taking numbers. And also, for an importer, it's always nice to see, okay, the acidity is good, the alcohol is good. That's exactly what we are looking for.
Yeah.
But that tells nothing about how the wine later on tastes.
Exactly right. Well, let's move on to these really special, this one special vineyard. So we have, Maximum Herrenberg, and you make a handful of wines from Herrenberg. And
Yes.
my colleague came in at the end here as this was just delivered, and the very special, 1896 bottling as well.
Nice.
But talk to us a little bit about this site. I think,
Yeah.
though I'm not always big on just talking about rocks and soil, but I think that in this case, it is worth bringing up a little bit, because it's an important point of distinction.
Yeah. So maybe starting talking about Maximilian Herrenberg vineyards, it's important to start a little bit how those vineyards ended up in our estate. So we talked about before that in 1803, there was a big auction. My family bought one vineyard in that auction. And so the whole family story started. Some vineyards our family didn't buy because they were 20 kilometers away, and there was another abbey that was sold in 1803. And there was a different family, the Schmitt-Wagner family, who bought that in 1803, having 1.5 hectare of over 100-year-old ungrafted vines, which is super rare and unique. And so, we got the chance to buy these, and that's what we did. We also were super interested in that estate because it had a very special terroir. So basically, where our winery is located in Loewen, and also most parts of the Mosel, you have blue and gray slate. But 20 kilometer upstream in Longish, you have high portions of iron. That makes the slate coloring red. And that brings a completely different aromatics. So it's more about herbals, floral aromatic, and a bit more complexity. In Mosel, we have a very old vineyard classification from 1868. It's the second oldest vineyard classification of the world, even older than Burgundy. And in that classification, there was one prime parcel from the Schmitt-Wagner family. It was the only parcel in the whole town that was in that highest category. And so, and that was a parcel that the Schmitt-Wagner family planted 1896. And it seems to be that these are probably the oldest Riesling vines in the world. It is a big, big honor for us that we can make now 2 wines out of that very special vineyard.
That's great. And Thank you so much for allowing us to have a little bit of that a little bit of that wine. They're quite special.
You're welcome. Yeah.
But also the vineyard itself is not just the 1896 parcels, correct? I mean, there's parcels that are much younger
Yes.
that were
Yeah.
planted in 1903.
Yes. So we have that one parcel that is planted 1896, which lays on the bottom of the hill where we do those two types of 1896 Rieslings. So one with the wax, where we try to make a very traditional wine like in the year 1896. So only handwork in the vineyard, pressed on a wooden basket press, and a very, very traditional mindset. And then we have, as you said, one parcel that is a bit younger, planted 1903, our Grand Cru parcel, so große Gewächs we say in German, or GG. This is a lot steeper, a lot stonier, and it brings a bit more complexity and power, and that's why we decided to make it as GG.
Yeah.
And then in the same red slate hill, there's another parcel or three other parcels that are also ungrafted, pre-phylloxera, like the others, but again a bit younger, so just about 100 years old. And that's where we make a special cabinet from the Herrenberg vineyard. 3 parcels very up far the hill, which brings higher altitude, more freshness, more elegance. And I really like the idea of making cabinet from ungrafted vines, because the ungrafted vines, they grow slower and weaker. And due to this, the wines have more structure. Also, on this way, we can make a style of cabinet that has in the mid palate a lot of structure and backbones, but in the finish, it has that very typical cabinet elegance.
Yeah. It's like it's deep, it's concentrated, and I use this, the kind of the same terminology when we're talking about these older vines, because it's just it's hard to articulate that concentration that you get, but this is still a very much a classic crunchy cabinet that's
definitely.
for everyday consumption. It just so happens that these vines have seen a lot.
Yeah.
And then lastly, a wine from your home village.
Yes. So on top of the wines we make from Longish, we also, of course, have the top side of our town of Loewen. It's the vineyard called Laurenzuslei. Laurenzuslei, a very unique terroir. It's one of the rockiest vineyard we have in our area, and it's really what shows quite well how hard the slate in this hill is that the state tried to build roads in the mid of the hill in the 80s, and they did trials to crack the slate, and they saw that it's impossible to crack it. It's so hard, they couldn't build a road. So there's only one road on the bottom of the hill and one road on top of the hill.
Wow.
And that brings a lot of work to us, because due to this, it's only handwork possible. So there's no machine work in the vineyard. But it has the big advantage that due to this, people didn't replant the vineyard because it was just way too much work.
Right.
And so more or less they said, we accept very, very low yields, because replanting would mean in this dry vineyard having 6 years of no grapes, which like normally after 2 years you have the first grapes. And so it was a big advantage for us that nowadays we have here a vineyard with over 100-year-old ungrafted vines, single pole training system, and on top in Laurenzuslei, because of that handwork, we can plant even denser. So we don't need to make wide rows for machines driving through. And due to this, we still have here the very traditional way of farming in Mosel with 10,000 vines per hectare plantation, which is the double amount of vines what is planted normally. Yeah.
Wow. I have to say, just a big, thank you. And it's great to, to know you and your family and these wines. It really is, it feels lucky to, sell these wines and to tell your story through customers. And thank you for, all of the inspiration. And yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Skurnik Unfiltered is recorded at Skurnik Wines and Spirits headquarters in the Flatiron District of New York City, which is why you might hear some city noises as we go along, like horns honking. If you found the conversation interesting, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. You can stay up to date on our show and upcoming events by following Skurnik Wines on Instagram and visiting our website at skurnik.com.